Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the closing keynote session of Library 2.022 Urban Librarianship. This has been a terrific day. We are so appreciative of San Jose State University School of Information, the founding partner for this conference series, 12 years going now. Additionally, for this conference, the Urban Libraries Council participated as an additional partner. I'd like to turn the time over now to Dr. Anthony Chow, who will introduce our closing keynote speakers.
Thank you, Steve. So we hope you found today's presentations interesting and meaningful and idea generating. For our closing session, we are delighted to have Naomi Jelks from SFPL and Dr. Sheryl Davis with the San Francisco Human Rights Commission. Their talk is entitled, "We All Have the Power to Help, Advancing Racial Equity at Public Libraries." Before they begin, let me introduce both to you. Naomi Jelks is the Racial Equity Manager for the San Francisco Public Library. Naomi began her library career at San Francisco Public Library as an adult services librarian at the Linda Brooks Burden Bayview Branch Library. It was there she developed a deep understanding of how to create Black affirming public programs for SFPL. She served as the African American Center librarian and later the center's program manager, where she successfully partnered with Dr. Sheryl Davis to bring Black luminaries, Jacqueline Woodson and the late Congressman John Lewis, to SFPL. She has also co-created the Black and Brown Comics Arts Festival partnership, which centered speculative fiction writers as well as those creating comic art. At San Jose State, a San Jose State University alumnus, outstanding, Naomi brings over 10 years of experience collaborating to create innovative programs and partnerships. Now, Dr. Sheryl Davis, she's the Executive Director of the San Francisco Human Rights Commission. Sheryl is a change maker who leads relationship-driven, community-centered initiatives. Named Executive Director of the San Francisco Human Rights Commission in 2016, Dr. Davis is a passionate advocate for equity, access, and educational opportunity for all. For nearly 3 decades, she has made contributions as an educator and leader with expertise in community outreach and engagement, workforce development, youth development, and violence prevention. Dr. Davis worked to build out an equity framework with San Francisco community stakeholders and city departments, resulting in the Office of Racial Equity. She also oversees the Blue Ribbon Panel for Juvenile Justice Reform, the Dreamkeeper Initiative, and the Everybody Reads program, among other programs at the San Francisco Human Rights Commission. Dr. Davis is frequently requested to speak on issues of community wellness, equity, and strategic change work. She holds a BA from San Francisco State University, also my alma mater, an MPA from the University of San Francisco, and an EDD from USC Rossier. In 2019, she was awarded the honorary doctorate from USM. So please join me in welcoming Naomi and Dr. Davis.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Anthony. Sheryl, how are you this afternoon?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction, Anthony. And thank you, Naomi, for the opportunity to sit and talk with you a little bit today.
Oh, absolutely. I looked at all of the today's whole program, and it was really heartening to see programs that centered equity. And one of my favorite local educators is Kareem Weaver of Oakland, California. And he speaks really powerfully about reading as a foundational indicator of lifelong success. And I think about that a lot as a mother, and I think about that a lot as a librarian, the nexus between literacy and social justice. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that piece, like the connection between literacy and social justice.
I missed the last part of what you said, Naomi, the connection.
I said, if you can talk a little bit about the nexus between literacy and social justice.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting for me. I grew up well, I didn't really grow up, but I was born in Texas, born in just outside of Dallas. Spent most of my summers there as a child, and I've got siblings in Houston now. And for me, I have this real recollection of my mother's experience, right? The Jim Crow South, this idea that she used to talk about getting her textbooks and knowing that they had been passed down from the white schools
Mhm.
and that, you know, people had written comments because they knew that the books were going to be passed down to the Black schools the next year. And they had written things in the books that weren't very nice. And I just remember her talking about this experience of getting these used books a year after they had been used by other schools, and having to read not just the text that was inside them, but the notes that white students had left that weren't very kind. And so for me, literacy and access to books became a real embedded in me. Like, what are we going to do? How do we do this so that books don't become something where you feel like it's secondhand, or that there's nothing special about it, or that you're fearful about what you're going to read inside of it. That for me, this nexus, the power of literacy, the power of education, the power of academics, the fact that for so long, so many people were denied the opportunity to even learn how to read. And so there's so much intertwined in that for me when I think about and talk about social justice. It really does. My mom used to laugh at me and say, I act like I came from Jim Crow South myself. I feel like it was my experience. And she's like, but there was no, but I feel like there was I feel like there was the essence of Jim Crow, even though the laws were gone, the essence of it, I felt like it was still very real.
Well, you know, it's funny, as you were talking, I was thinking of two really powerful programs that we collaborated with you on. One was a recent talk you had with Alice Walker, who, you know, it's always interesting to hear folks' library story. Everyone has a library story. Alice Walker's story about libraries was not that uplifting. She grew up in the Jim Crow South, where she and other Black folks did not have access to public libraries. However, she was literate and well-read because of her family and their use of elders within the community, Brer Rabbit stories, really onboarding to reading. And obviously she's one of our national treasures. And, you know, also thinking about the late Congressman John Lewis, who I didn't know at the time when March 1 was published, kind of the reason why he went with the graphic novel format. Part of it had to do with obviously reaching youth, but the other part is that in the struggle, there was at the time a comic that they used in the struggle to reach young people, to tell the story of the work that they were doing in ways to, you know, more deeply penetrate the consciousness of young people. And, you know, you live in a time where you think everything that is new is really new when it really isn't. And so I think of like the different ways that some of our partnerships have creatively used literacy to really, you know, kind of penetrate more deeply into communities. And so I think that if you can talk a little bit, because this, I believe, predates your position as director for HRC and kind of goes back to when you were leading Collective Impact. So can you talk a little bit about just some of your educational experiences, some of your professional experiences as to how you landed on literacy and the work you've done within the community?
So, you know, I started my career actually as a kindergarten teacher, and I taught only in private schools when I first started in my career. And I remember working in this very extremely affluent school and amazing community of folks and great neighborhood. And I remember where I was living and the struggles that some of the kids that I had in my community that I started volunteering in were having. And it became very clear to me when we talk about academic opportunities, when we talk about the ability to make learning fun, to really shift how that, so that it's not punitive, but that it's rewarding, and that you get to meet authors, and that the librarians and everyone are excited to that they have the best resources and that they have access to all of these things. And yet there wasn't that same opportunity for some of the kids in the community where I live. The school libraries were struggling to get things and the resources. And so that for me became the first piece of this. Typically our access to authors is not the same for some of our inner city schools or some of our lower under-resourced schools, right? They can't afford to pay the speaker's fee. And then even if they pay the speaker's fee, they can't pay for the books. And it became really important for me to share that love of getting a hardcover book and having it signed by the author and meeting the author. And I think my first kind of entree into that was Jacqueline Woodson. I just was very fortunate and didn't realize over the years that you have helped me and others have really helped me with understanding Kwame Alexander and Jacqueline Woodson, and all these folks are really like the rock stars of the literary world, especially when it comes to children's books. But I didn't know, so I just randomly would email or call, and they would say yes to come and present. And I think my opportunity to talk with Kwame was actually presented by the library. And I remember the first time we had Jacqueline Woodson come out, she did this talk and she met with some young people. And about a month later, a young man who was about 8 or 9, who had been really kind of struggling with some things, his mother came up to me and said, you know, I just want you to know my son has changed how he sees himself. He now considers himself an author. He considers himself a writer. He now takes out his pen and paper and he writes all the time. And I thought, and she said, and it's because he met this author, Jacqueline Woodson. And then she told me later, another time I saw her, they lived in a neighborhood that had a lot of gun violence. And she said to me that one night there were gunshots going off and her son went and grabbed his 2 younger siblings and sat down in the corridor with them and started to read to them as a way to distract them from all that was going on. And he read a Jacqueline Woodson book. And that's when I realized the power of the book is not just about the ability to read or comprehend, but we always talk about like your imagination or the books can take you to other places. Being free to imagine and think in a different way, being open to believing that you can go as far as you can dream. That's what I think books and literacy do. And that social justice element, that ability for young people to see themselves in the book, but also to see a new world is so critical. And if we don't expose them to books, if we don't create these opportunities, they will be lost.
Wow. I mean, it's pretty amazing, the young man that you referenced, because for me personally, when I met Jacqueline Woodson, I couldn't even speak because I was so flummoxed, because authors really are the rock stars of the library world. She's so wonderful and you know, just that story alone in terms of how she impacted this one child. And this one child was able to go back to his home and share some of that magic with his siblings under really difficult circumstances is kind of the magic of literacy. It really is the magic of, you know, kind of thinking about racial equity and social justice in not these really wooden type ways or academic ways, but using what we have in a library. Literacy is the bedrock of what we do, and then figuring out through partnership and through being in community, like how we can elevate that and really help to uplift communities that we are already trying to serve, but how can we kind of improve or, you know, shine those relationships? So I think that's a lot of what I've picked up in the many years of partnership that we've had, that's really gratifying.
I mean, if I could add to that, Naomi, because I think that what's interesting when I think about a Matt De La Peña and, you know, Market Street, the book, or the newest one that he's done with Christian Robinson around Milo Imagines the World, like when young people get those books, the connection that they make, where everybody, I don't know if folks have experienced this, but everybody thinks that the book is centered in their town, right? Like they think it's their subway, their bus line. Like everybody's like, that's my neighborhood. And that creation of like seeing people and creating a space where folks can see themselves, that connectivity that opens it up for conversation and dialogue, but also to see the world, to be able to now be like, oh, now I'm going to pay closer attention to what's happening in the world around me, because there are stories there that are there that I might have one narrative for it, but the reality of it may be very different.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that one of the other key takeaways that I've learned over the years in watching you and other partners, folks that we partnered with here at the library, is really looking at the role libraries can play as a space, as an important convening space for community. One of those steps in elevating that space is ensuring that you're creating programming that is affirming to Black and Brown youth that you're serving, or just the audience. Can you talk a little bit about what that magic right there? Because that is really magical to see it develop and to sit and watch a program unfold and really seeing equity at work.
Yeah, I've been really grateful for the partnership with the library, and I see somebody like pointing out your Alfonso Jones poster, and it's interesting because the Black Comics Festival that you've done over the years with on MLK birthday and celebration, this idea of like creating something, this idea of building something, like it just takes our willingness to collaborate and partner. So when I think about the work that I've been able to do over the years, both as a community member and now as the director of the Human Rights Commission in San Francisco with the library, and I see that Michael is on, our chief librarian, I don't know what the proper title is, but that ability to like say yes to these things is huge. So when we talked about launching Everybody Reads and saying like we want to get books in the hands of young people, and we want to work with service providers who work with young people during the summer, and the library was like, yes, let's do it. That was huge. There are all these programs that are either in public housing sites, or the grandmother that just happens to have like 10 kids come by her house, or the Boys and Girls Club or the YMCA. They all have access to young people during the summer, but they didn't really see themselves as teachers, and they didn't see themselves as librarians. And what we were able to do is to say, here's a book and here's an activity to do that book. And it's just mind blowing. I think this year we've given out already 1,500 kits of like the copies of the book, the activities, and then these workshops for service providers and family members. And to have people come back and say, this was great, or like, I feel like I'm now contributing to this and I'm changing the narrative about what it means to be a reader. Those are the things that when we start to not take for granted or judge people on how often they go to the library or how many books they check out. I had to say to someone the other day, like, if you get one book and that child likes that book and they read it over and over and over and over and over again, like, that's a beautiful thing, right? Like, to be able to love something, to cherish it and build on it, I think is a beautiful thing. And so the library's ability to say, we're going to focus on what community has asked for and we're going to support them. And then we're going to create a space where folks do want to come back to the library, not just for the books, but for the people.
Right, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I thought had many thoughts for what you just shared, but I think we've all had that child who isn't an avid reader, whether it's in our personal life or in our professional life, and you put the right book in their hands and it's transformational. I think even more so when you're helping to support BIPOC youth, and you can hand them an I Am Alfonso Jones or a book by a creator, or Kwame Alexander, a creator that looks like them, who maybe have similar experiences as them. They might not read it the first time, but they will pick it up. And when they do, that magic that happens, you're like, they get it. And then, you bring the family on board, the parents who may or may not love graphic novels, but my feeling is all reading is good reading. And it becomes a habit for young people, and whether it's magazines or books or what have you. And it is really quite gratifying for programming we have here in the library, or even partnerships that where we push out into the community, really meeting people where they are, engaging youth and their families, and really talking to them and really developing that deeper connection and having them say, hey, are you at the main library? And I'm like, yes, I am at the main library. Come and see me. I'm on the 3rd floor. And you make friends and you build relationships that way as well. I think in reference to what you shared about the Everybody Reads partnership that we've developed over the years, one of the things that I'm always interested in is how young people respond to the resources the library has. So the beautiful booklet that was created, let's see, can't really see it right here. I think one of the things I was hanging out with a 4-year-old, and she was coloring in the book and marveling over the pictures, and it really struck me. As an adult, we do our adult thing. I personally go to the narrative, but causing myself to kind of slow down and really engage with the images and really understand the role of art in also engaging youth with reading and with the Everybody Reads program. Can you talk a little bit about the intentionality in putting together this annual booklet that you provide to the community?
Yeah, I would say, my years teaching in private school and knowing that students got a reading list at the end of the school year for them to read over the summer to come back to school prepared, that they had access to the books, and that they also had access to the fun of learning, right? Like that idea that you choose a book because you enjoy it and you go and you read it and you imagine. And so I wanted to create that opportunity for young people to see it not as just something you do for school, but you do it because you enjoy it and it makes you feel better. And so that was the focus. When we first started, it was really key to have books by and about Black people, because we were really trying to address the achievement gap and the learning and the opportunity gap. And it's grown. I put a link in the chat to last year's guide, but that we really have been trying to say, like, what is it that we can invest in, that we can build? And it's interesting, we do these book giveaways and people will say to me, oh, she took too many books. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like if we're like, we're not going to be upset that a student took like 3 books instead of 1. Like if they are taking books, and I had to tell someone one time, because we were doing a backpack giveaway and book giveaway, and they were like, they're stealing books. And I was like, I don't think they're stealing books. They're taking multiple copies of books. And that means we've done our job if they've come here and they want more than 1 book. Because I mean, and even if they're stealing them to sell out in community, I'm like, if they're selling books and people are buying, like, I'm also grateful for that. Like anything, like if we've got people pushing books like that, like I'm not going to be mad about it. And I think that's the part where I want people to see and understand, like, these are good things. That's what we want to see, that they are seeing the books as something worth having.
No, absolutely. I'm also looking at the chat and I see that the city librarian, Michael Lambert, said, mentioned that the importance of book giveaways, like that is part of, here in San Francisco in the Bay Area, kind of our bread and butter to get books in the hands of community. And when I remember one instance, actually a couple instances, early-ish during the COVID crisis, where I worked with Ella Hill Hutch and the nonprofit over in Bayview to get books into the hands of young people, and how the community responded. And they were like, oh, we're taking too many books. And I'm like, of course not. There's no such animal as taking too many books. We want young people to be surrounded in books that look like, authors that look like them, with stories that resonate with them, because even if they don't read it today, they will eventually read it. Or even just sitting with the beautiful artwork and feeling affirmed and seen by seeing Black and brown characters that aren't animals, but actual people, on books. I think that is where it's at. That's what young people and their families look for. And I think it's incredibly powerful for me, even during COVID, when the first 6 months, as I was giving books away in community, that the response from community, that they were like, oh, absolutely, we need books, we want books, we're grateful that you're out here to help support us. So, I mean, I think in the opening session, I think one of the speakers talked about the importance of libraries, you know, in so many different ways, the kind of wraparound support that we provide to the community, I think is second to none. And as we try to emerge from COVID with some of the best practices, ideas of how to take what we know and grow it, I think resonates even more.
Well, I would just add to that, you know, as we were talking about this, I just am reminded of, we've worked with Coach Nate, who coaches AAU and works at the works at the library, works at the Rec and Park. And he coaches hundreds of young people, and he invited us to do book giveaways at his Saturday game. So they have this rotation through, and so we posted up there. And I got to tell you, we brought dragon hoops from Gene Young, and basically we couldn't keep them on the table. Like they were flying off. And then on top of that, then we brought other books, and then the siblings and the parents and everyone. Here we were at a sporting event, and people were like, where are the books? Where are the books? You know, that was just, you know, it was a great thing, because it doesn't have to mean you make a choice between sports and literacy, but that they are really connected, and folks were excited about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what you just shared really resonates, because I'm looking at the chat and I see Megan in Indianapolis mentioned that they do book giveaways at a local laundromat, and which sounds like it's fairly successful. So really meeting people where they're at and being creative about how we're engaging community, where we show up, and pushing beyond the boundaries of our physical spaces, our rec centers, our public libraries, to just kind of be everywhere that the community has stated, hey, we'd like you to be present.
And I think the question about, like, does it matter if they're white or folks of color? I think the books are the most important thing. You know, I think that is really key in terms of the distribution. Just being able to have people out there. I think, you know, one of the things that we've had to really work on and normalize is that, you know, you don't have to have Black kids in your program to give out books about Black and brown folks. You don't have to be Black. And that's been a constant struggle, where I've had people say to me, well, I don't really need the books on Black and brown kids because I don't have Black and brown kids in my program. And I'm like, all the more reason you need books on Black and brown kids, so that there's not a narrative about who they are, but that folks see this broader world. So I think that is really important, that we don't have only Black people giving out Black books, but that we all are like highlighting and showcasing and celebrating the diversity of authors, illustrators, and books.
No, absolutely. I wanted to take a moment, because we're coming to the top of the hour, to see if anyone, any audience members, I'm sorry, I didn't address you and welcome you when we started, to see if anyone had any comments. Shoot them into the chat, because we have about 2 or 3 minutes left. But I do like what you just shared, that last part, Sheryl, because it is quite true. It's kind of like moving beyond the idea that Black History Month should only be during February, or you only need to do that in locations where Black people live, because Black history is American history. So it's something we should all sit with. Well, I don't see any questions at this point. Do you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to share, Sheryl?
No, I just again want to thank everyone for joining us today and for this opportunity to share with you all. I love books and I love talking about them.
Wonderful. Same here. Thank you so much, Sheryl. It was wonderful.
Well, thank you very much. On behalf of the entire committee, I want to thank Steve, all of our high school volunteers, all participants today. Thank you, Naomi, Dr. Davis, for your insightful and really inspirational conversation. I also want to thank all the participants today, panelists, presenters, and attendees, for joining us. It's a true privilege for the iSchool to sponsor today's symposium. All of you that put so much hard work into it. Michael, I'm glad to see you here. All presentations have been recorded, and full transcripts and recordings and links to slides will be made available over the next couple of weeks. We're also creating a web-based virtual reality library to house and share these proceedings as well. So be safe, stay well, and thank you all for all that you're doing to improve the lives of others. Have a wonderful day.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.